The human species has never been a linear species. Seasons aren't linear. Nothing is linear. Our diets aren't linear. Nothing is linear, but we live linear lives. We had roughly about 200 people doing this. Then our group of hackers who hacked that whole program started to see certain things happening. So I think that was kind of key. It was all about recognizing that melatonin is not about sleep.
I felt, most people just, when they take melatonin in either even smaller doses or larger doses, they just kind of try to force the body, kind of whomp it against the head and say, sleep now,
Mellow your day first.
Right.
You're priming yourself while you're awake. And what we found out of all of that was that de-stressing period helped them to fall asleep, but they were also so relaxed it was just able to just keep carrying on. So we've seen huge upsides to this. So it's been a long time that we've been at this, and it's narrowed down to the point where this is our common protocol to help people get started in all of this, de-stress their life.
Hello, I'm Tadas. I'm your insomniac next door. If you're new here to my channel, welcome. I am a recovering insomniac, and my goal here is simple. I want to sleep like a baby again, and I will share all this knowledge with you. Today I'm interviewing a fellow biohacker, a retired telecom engineer, who runs a Facebook group called Biology Reboot, Logical Actionable Mitigation, and goes by the online handle as Ken Obi. This is not meant to be a medical advice, so experiment at your own risk. It's us sharing our knowledge, and Ken is sharing his research and finding with his group. So our interview is about half an hour, so grab yourself a cup of chamomile tea and let's hang out. Ken, so I'm grateful that you have decided and taken the time to meet with me today. There are a few things that spiked my interest from some of the things you shared in our group, and I think it will be very valuable to hear it directly from you, since you seem to have taken a lot of time to research this thing. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into this topic of researching melatonin in the first place?
Sure. Quickly, though, I'll tell you that my evolution was of brain chatter. Mm-hmm. That's where it all kind of started. And then a doctor did a thing and decided that I had sleep apnea, so got me on one of those machines. And that helped me to keep my mouth shut, because snoring obviously was a big problem. And that was pre me getting into paleo and starting all of this type of, shift in proper diet. And so to fast forward a little bit, I had kind of resolved the brain chatter a little bit, but being an engineer, I just couldn't shut it down. And then paleo helped a lot. That helped a lot. And then I got involved with a lady called Doris Lowe. Doris and I got involved to the point that during COVID, let me back up just quickly. Let's do quickly that vitamin C slide that you've got there.
Okay.
And I want to have that as a reference just for serum levels, because it really feeds into this melatonin hack that we did with our hacking group. And if you'll notice, now this is a comparison between an ascorbic acid and ascorbate. Ascorbic has 2 electrons, ascorbate's got 1. So obviously with 2, you can give up 1 and receive 1. So it will cycle longer. But even then, if I look at the screen there, it's really out of your system after about an hour, maybe 2, looking at ascorbic acid. And so then after that, a lot of us were taking vitamin C every couple of hours. And then Doris got into melatonin. It was interesting in that one of the first papers that she found used quite a high dose. But in that, very similarly, you see a similar trend that you saw in vitamin C, and that is about 2 hours later, it's
right. This is plasma concentration. Sorry for the poor resolution, and this is minutes, right? And then we have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours, and so on.
After about 2 hours, it's really out of your system.
So you have a spike. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so this is based on 10 milligrams, but you can also envision that even microdosing, which is that black slide, how even microdosing or nootropic levels are going to go through this same cycle, right? So we found that very interesting. And so Doris and I worked heavily on a COVID routine that we might want to get for people that were, catching COVID and stuff. And in all of that, my area of desire and stuff is detoxing. Mm-hmm. And of course, with melatonin, vitamin C, there's a connection there with detoxing. And because obviously with sleep, you're now getting into this cycle of ultradian cycles, roughly the 90-minute cycle of sleep, where you're going through the deep sleep, tissue repair, and then REM sleep to get your, brain healing and such, resolution of issues, etc. So we came up with this protocol that really was very much a mirror of a lot of stuff that people go through anyway. Then our group of hackers who hacked that whole program started to see certain things happening. One was about 20% of our people who took even microdosing at bedtime, I'm talking under 1 milligram,
right,
were getting bad nightmares, waking up with massive insomnia, like wide awake. Not just a little bit awake, but wide awake.
But these are people that normally take melatonin, or no? Or this was like new? Oh, I see. And this is
ground
first
zero,
time.
right? Mm-hmm. This is hacking through it,
right,
for the protocols of COVID and stuff. And in all of that, there was also this preloading with melatonin. Okay. And a number of members said, look, I would like to try hacking no bedtime dose and take it earlier in the day, like try for a nap or, all of these different types of things. Mm-hmm. And the nap thing failed. There was all sorts of things that kind of failed during the day. Now, let me make a quick caveat here. I am not talking about cancer patients. We have a couple in our group, and they are taking massively high doses with doctor supervision and labs and the whole thing. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the similarity to CBD oils and stuff where you're taking these micro nutrient.
Right. Okay.
So then what happened was we discovered that people who were having midnight pee and hunger issues at night, which probably falls into some of this insomnia and that type of thing. So I just call it the midnight pee. Mm-hmm. as a general, that's all. And what we found was that with the melatonin, a lot of people dropped off with this whole hunger midnight pee thing. Now, because that happened, I got hyper focused on that side. And I started looking and questioning with Doris, the gut makes more melatonin than your brain does. Is this dosing that's going into the stomach just merely correcting a problem in the gut? Mm-hmm. Because you can imagine that, and research shows this, there are certain bacteria that sleep on our same cycles, which explains why if you let the nap happen and not fight through it, I think the gut gets on that cycle. Not necessarily every day, but, goes through it. And the group sort of carried on and everything. And then a number of them said, look, I don't need it to fall asleep. This is ridiculous. And so a whole group of people that didn't need it to fall asleep said, well, we're still taking it an hour after dinner. So not at dinner, right? An hour after dinner, hold it sublingually if you can. A lot of people like that. And then 2 hours after that, take another microdose. Those two totals shouldn't go over 1 milligram. That's our goal. Mm-hmm. And in that goal of 1 milligram, we try to make sure they randomize it. Don't try to lock in. The human species has never been a linear species. Seasons aren't linear. Nothing is linear. Our diets aren't linear. Nothing is linear, but we live linear lives.
Right. Yeah.
Once we industrialize the human being for an 8-hour sleep, we kind of mess things up, right? Um, so then we found huge, as they called it, de-stressing period. So after dinner, the dishes are done, the family's trying to relax and everything. And a lot of people said they could just feel themselves shedding and just letting the world go. And out of that, they could fall asleep fine. But I think most of those people were falling asleep fine out of exhaustion, not because they were ready to sleep, but because they were so exhausted they had to sleep. Once we saw this thing, what it meant was that if it's only a 2-hour cycle for so many of these supplements that we take,
Right. Mm-hmm.
does it answer the question of the midnight pee? We all know the importance of sleep. There's no question on that. And that always drove me around the napping thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, well, let's come back to that thing. Don't ever take melatonin close to meal. You don't want to be doing that,
Right.
right? And you want to take it about an hour after. There is science on that stuff. And so then you've got these cycles. You've got 1 hour after, 2 hours after that, and then make that about 2 hours before bedtime. Now, for many of us in our group, that means going to bed about 9:30 and then falling asleep by 10.
Right.
And what we found out of all of that was that de-stressing period helped them to fall asleep, but they were also so relaxed it was just able to just keep carrying on. So all of that, as I going back to my brain chatter, which every time I got into REM sleep, the brain chatter would take over, wake me up, right? And sometimes not being able to fall back to sleep. So we've seen huge upsides to this. And now it's moved into, what other things could we use that might be a little bit more natural than actually taking a straight up hormone, especially in countries where you can't buy melatonin. We take it for granted that you can get it, but not everybody can.
Right.
So things like CBD oil, my wife likes CBD with indica, but I think it is that whole leveling effect that we're finding from the melatonin in a nootropic level. But coming back to napping a little bit, I found, and a lot of people found, there was no advantage to taking melatonin. Let's say you were intermittent fasting and you were having your breakfast at 10 a.m. You're waking up at maybe 5. And you've already done exercise to burn off some cortisol and burn off some glycogen in your muscles. And then, you have a breakfast at 10 o'clock, and then 11 o'clock, you have a microdose or up to maybe even 1 milligram to help with a nap. But I quickly found if I didn't need the nap, I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did take melatonin and I felt an urge to have a nap and I took the nap, I was still waking up 30 to 60 minutes later anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So didn't find any advantage
during daytime. Yeah.
During the daytime at all. Again, we're not talking cancer because they can go through.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So yeah, that's been kind of the evolution. It kind of started with the whole COVID thing, putting together a program that included detox. Our group is very much into detox, and it was the ladies of the group that actually helped this whole myth of ketosis and fasting. And they came down with a timing issue to do with ketosis, timing issue to do with fasting. And so, they've been very helpful as far as they can read themselves better than men, right?
Yeah.
Our longer term testosterone thing is we're always problem solving as men, whereas the ladies, they can multitask all these problem solving things and shelf them and come back to them.
Right.
So it was from them that a lot of the men then discovered this nootropic level. You don't need to hammer it. You can gradually screw it in and get that de-stressing level and that calming thing coming down.
Right.
Now you have to remember that our group had already been into the red lights, like the one you've got in the background there, getting lots of daylight or sunlight, so that your circadian rhythms are dialing in tight for the brain side of the melatonin.
So, Ken, what would you say were your biggest findings thus far that made the biggest difference for your group, so they can fall asleep faster and easier?
Yeah. I would say if you wanted to look at a percentage, which is easier to work with, and to give it a little bit of a caveat, we had roughly about 200 people doing
Mhm.
this. Okay, for a bigger hacks and kind of ongoing now. And I'd say the biggest finding is that de-stressing period, shedding the day off. And so, 1 hour after eating, 2 hours after, you would have a micro dose. So in my case, let's say I do 250 micrograms.
Mhm.
And then 2 hours after that, maybe take, 500 micrograms. And then 2 hours after that, I'm going to hit the sheets, go to bed. And then we always try and fall asleep by 10 o'clock.
Right,
So up early with that long sun,
right, right.
etc. And I would say that's the biggest thing out of all of this.
Hmm.
Uh, and this has been really since, June of 2020. So it's been a long time that we've been at this, and it's narrowed down to the point where this is our common protocol to help people get started in all of this, de-stress their life, which is also finding on the morning side of things to be that much better because the family isn't waking up with, all of this stuff they were pounded at all evening long, right? So
Right.
that mellowing has been, maybe even conflict resolution, as a couple of people have said. We've been able to have calm conversations about, whether we're going to buy that car or not, and it's simple life stuff that can put a lot of stress on people. So,
Yeah. Ken, one of the most interesting things that you shared a TED talk,
right.
and he he was showing this melatonin curve, and I found it very peculiar where you said that that curve showed that if you took melatonin too close to your peak, it would actually peak out sooner. It would drop uh, as well sooner, and
Right.
people would wake up too early. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, we went through that whole midnight pee thing, right?
Hmm.
And what we found was the brain was producing enough melatonin because the people were using circadian cycles and light properly. And so you were adding to your brain production of melatonin, and all that was doing was spiking it even higher and then dropping completely down. And which the net result is it actually pulled it down too hard.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and then I ran into a fellow who was talking about nothing but nootropics. And in there, he had a little snippet, probably only about 2 minutes, where he talked about microdosing. And then that changed everything for us as far as, people say taking 5 milligrams an hour after dinner and then wanting a nap before they went to bed.
Uh-huh.
And so quickly we discovered, there's that indirect correlation to those who take CBD.
Hmm.
How, we all, maybe you were a child of the 70s or not, people listening, you would know that you get that mellowing out, right? And so, there was the plus. Mellow your day first.
Right.
You're priming yourself while you're awake.
Right.
Let your melatonin do its job. And then hopefully, you don't have any jitters and stuff as you're coming out of that first ultradian cycle, which
Right.
then quite often starts the insomnia. And you might get into another cycle of 90 minutes, but maybe not.
Right.
So I think that was kind of key. It was all about recognizing that melatonin is not about sleep. I mean, so much cancer patients, it's not about sleep.
Hmm.
It's about that whole proper hormone cycling. It's all about leveling out your life and doing it at that range. So what's been happening lately is we've had new members come on board. They're getting the midnight pee, they're getting the midnight hunger, and they're taking melatonin to bed, and boom, they're getting the massive nightmares, the insomnia, all of that type of thing. And so we pull them off of that, they go back to the melatonin, and everything's good. But some of these people can't fall asleep all that well. So now we're introducing CBD there at the bedtime because it's not melatonin. And as you showed that curve, I don't think you would find that spike happening because your melatonin's already produced here. You're not adding melatonin,
Right.
it's adding the mellowing. And my gut feeling is that, you know, because of our previous hacks and everything, within a month or two, those people could probably even come off the CBD.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I've actually when I read your post, of course I had to try it. I normally take I know my perfect dose at bedtime is about 2.5 milligrams, not 3, like not 2, 2.5. It's interesting, and I realize if I take 3, I wake up too early. If I take 2, it may not be enough for me to fall asleep at the time when I want to fall asleep. So I kind of narrowed it down to 2.5. So then I said, okay, let's take it at 8 p.m. You know, when I'm usually going to bed at 10, I will take the melatonin. I figured a best case scenario by 10:30 I should be sleeping. So I took 2 milligrams at 8 p.m. and I normally go do my practices and meditate. And I realized I'm way more sleepy. Like it's a bit much for me. Like I could not focus. I was getting drowsy. I like the feeling a lot for another reason because I felt like my brain is getting more prepared for the sleep. So when I don't just jump in bed like, okay, let's do this, melatonin, whatever, passion flower, let's do this, let's fall asleep, and it usually doesn't work like that. So I really tested that theory, and I liked a lot about preparing your body to go to sleep in your brain. Then I tested with 1.5, and I still get a little drowsy. So now I'm going to try like maybe like 500 micrograms, right? And see, I want to find like this perfect dosage that, like you say, I mellow out, but I don't get drowsy and sleepy. So it's because there's still 2 hours of my life, right, that I have to like do something. So I'll try that. And so, besides that curve that you mentioned of melatonin curve, I'm actually thinking about melatonin in a different way. Was there anything else in that group that you discovered through, besides CBD, of course, that helped your members to fall asleep either faster or stay asleep throughout the night?
Well, that can be a little bit difficult because one of the very first things that we do for all members before we put them on any supplements or suggest, we never put them on, suggest supplements or any of that type of stuff, is we correct their circadian cycles. We correct their light in their house. We get them to turn off their Wi-Fi. All of that type of stuff comes into play with our group. And we have found, for instance, we've even had to move people's beds and boom, they fall asleep just like that because they've got maybe below them, there's a electric fan that's going and they get EMF off of the 60 hertz that's below them or 50 in parts of Europe. So move the bed over, they're no longer sleeping over top of that. Right. One guy, he was so determined, but then he got mad and he said, okay, then I'll move my chair over here. And he moved his chair over there. And I asked him a month later and he said, you know what? I think it might have had a difference. Now, again, is some of this just up here, self-healing by buying into a program? You can't put science to some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, but there's enough even anecdotal stories, or first experience sort of evidence that you can draw certain conclusions. Of course, this is maybe not science what we're talking about, but for example, like I even did a video when I couldn't sleep in the hotel for a long time, for like a night, and the second, I know first night is this, it's the first night at the new place, light sleep thing that most people know about. I mean, you just never sleep as good as you do at home at a new place. I mean, it's an evolutionary thing for us to have over the brain, they say, to keep alert and look for dangers, right? I mean, but a second night, I didn't sleep well and I said, this is strange. And then started researching and so on. I said, let's look into like a human energy field, magnetic field, and so on. And then they said, okay, stretches like 1.5 meters and so on. And then I realized I put my head in the hotel. What do? You put your head against the wall, and usually you have a mirror image bed on the other side of the hotel, and you're basically having this energetic sex with this other person, technically, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you may be completely mixing your energies, and you're wondering why you're not sleeping. If you're sensitive enough, especially people that are sensitive to EMFs and, a natural phenomena, they can actually be impacted by something like this. I really believe that.
Well, yeah, and you're talking to an engineer here.
Yeah.
Now, most of the engineers go poo 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 poo, and they just go like this.
Yeah.
For me, just part of the melatonin thing indirectly. For me, if you grab one of these things and you're walking around with it, it's got no wire on it for your internet and stuff. I have no problem with it at all. Just don't put it up against your head. I have no problem with you walking outside or sitting at a south facing window when it's really cold outside, getting all that EMF from the sun. Our hormones all cycle, even with microwaves and gamma ray, all of that type of stuff during the day. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is as soon as the golden hour starts, those radiations are all but gone. They're gone. And yet people will still sit there with it on and they'll flick through. And, you talk about brain chatter. I never went through brain chatter with this thing.
Yeah.
New people who get this flick problem because they're going through these devices. And it all logs in as, now I just call it information overload. You cannot process that amount of information.
So that's an interesting observation. You're just so I understand correctly. You're saying like during daytime we're exposed to all these EMFs, but because of our circadian rhythm, I mean, we're able to to deal with this extra interference, right? And you're saying the problem starts that it doesn't go away at bedtime, right?
Yeah. So the golden hour starts. It's a photography thing,
right? Yeah, of course, I know.
Yeah, it starts a half an hour before sundown, right?
Yes.
All of that. We'll just use microwaves. Microwaves are massively coming down, and yet you're still holding on to a microwave device.
Yes. Well, and the big screen TV, and something else large and electrical.
And then on top of that I'm not talking about the screen when I'm talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the broadcast.
Yeah, broadcast. Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, both Doris and I found two independent observations.
Mm-hmm.
One, both cited the Sweden, I think it was. When they went 24 hours with FM radio, and this is why I keep saying it's not a 5G problem. When they went to 24-hour broadcast with FM radio, melanoma had a spike.
Melanoma, skin cancer.
Skin cancer had a spike in that period where all of this started. Then TV went 24 hours. He keeps starting adding all of this up. And this is why with each generation of cell phone, people say, because let's say 6G's come along, you'll see people running down the road with their hair on fire over 6G, but they'll hold on to their 4G phone. And when 4G was launched, they ran down the road with their hair on fire.
Right.
So was FM really a problem when it's broadcasting during the hours of solar light? Or is it a nighttime issue? When those radiations, those frequencies, our hormones were built over billions of years. Now, I don't mean just human, this whole planet.
Right.
So this is why the whole hormone thing can be a dicey topic with a lot of people. Melatonin, vitamin D, all of these things. But used as a hammer when you feel a cold coming on can be very effective.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken 50 milligrams of melatonin if I feel a cold coming on, and it's
really
massively dampened.
For antioxidant effect?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same with vitamin D. How many people take a vitamin D hammer? They'll take a massive dose up to the, how do they call it? Cambura protocol, the guy out of Brazil. Do I believe in high doses of vitamin D for a long time? I don't believe in high doses of testosterone for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. All your hormones should be, ticking as they go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the main point really with your research, that I felt, most people just when they take melatonin in either even smaller doses or larger doses, they just kind of try to force the body, kind of whomp it against the head and say, sleep now, go to bed, you close your eyes and so on. But I really love this idea of naturally supporting the body's cycle, going with the natural rise of melatonin, taking smaller doses, and then you kind of, if you're not meeting the needed melatonin, you gently, spike it to that where it needs to be, right? Not up to here, what people do. And then it kind of naturally mellows out when it needs to. And then you wake up at the right time, right?
And the same with us, like, well, you're in Latvia, in British Columbia here, we get 16-hour days in summer.
Yeah, too.
So, I quite often only sleep 6.5 hours in the summer, but probably every second day, maybe 4 times a week, I get in a 60-minute nap in the middle of the day. Usually when it's the hottest time of day, it's weird, but
siesta. Canadian.
Siesta, but,
Canadians do siesta too.
Later in the day, but because I wake up very close to the sunrise,
right.
Or like when it gets really long days, obviously not, but before UVB rises in the sky,
right,
then I'm fine. I'm fine all the way through.
Okay. So can I ask you, as
data, right?
Yeah. As an engineer, like if you're, as for our audience, just to finish up, if you had to give like 3, different advice of like 1 or 2 sentences for them to sleep better based on your entire life's observation about everything, not necessarily melatonin. Ken, what would it be? The 3 things one should do to have a good night's sleep.
You have to understand pace of life, and you've got to pull that pace of life down.
Mm-hmm.
Work doesn't always dictate it, but you got to pull that pace of life down, because this is going to be number 1. I am all about never imprint on your kids. Like when COVID was happening, don't take that stress and give it to your kids. They'll have enough when they get older.
Mm-hmm.
Don't imprint future stresses.
Mm-hmm.
The other has been this melatonin thing, because I can't ignore it, even though I'm not taking it as much as I would. But our group, who is still working, and they drove all of this stuff. It wasn't me leading. It wasn't Marie or Craig leading. It was the group leading it. Can we try this? I said, fine, but start documenting it.
Right.
So melatonin 1 hour after dinner, and then 2 hours. We do find the 2 doses far superior to 1 dose.
Can you repeat the timing again, please, of the 2 doses?
Yeah, so 1 hour after dinner.
So that's like at what, 7 p.m., 8 p.m.? What's dinner in Canada?
Yeah, that's usually 5.
Okay, 5. So you take 1 dose at around 6, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then take another dose at 8.
What would the dose would be? That's the 300 micrograms?
Well, anything, again, we try and randomize so that you don't lock in.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as the 2 of them don't add up to more than 1 milligram. That fits in the microdosing nootropic levels, right?
Got it. Nootropic keyword, yes.
Keyword. So 1 hour after dinner, 3 hours after dinner. So dinner's at 5, take 1 at 6, take 1 at 8, and go to bed at 9:30 so you're asleep by 10. And that seems to be the kicker.
And no more at like when you're in bed, it's 10 and you take a last hit.
Yeah.
Nothing.
All of those who have got this de-stressing thing happening, they don't need any more at bed.
Right. Yeah. But they're not chronic insomniacs, right? Overall, this is more like just that we're able to fall asleep anyway.
Yeah, a lot of brain chatter.
Yeah. Okay. Brain chatter.
So get rid of that daytime.
Got it. Okay. So what's the third one?
The third one is my favorite, and that's detoxing.
I thought you were going to say whiskey, but okay, detox. Canadian bourbon, 250 milligrams.
Getting out in nature, all of that type of thing. Yeah, okay, I'll make that my third one, because it really is important to walk and talk and let your kids go and let the dog run. And I don't care whether it's a school park, at least it's got some trees. Some places got grass and stuff.
Totally.
And, you know, yeah.
So you said walking, right? The third one is walking.
Yeah, walking, hiking, getting out in
Yeah,
nature.
perfect.
I
Yeah.
think that's huge. Um, but in a modern world, I want to throw in a 3A, and that would be detoxing, learning how to detox.
Oh, detox. Yeah. Okay.
Because
I think this, you started with detoxing, just
yeah,
general detox
I
is
have a sweat box behind me, and even in summer, I
right.
use it, you know.
Yeah, which is very wise because we know we often talk about total body burden when it comes to toxins or any interferences and so on. And if you're doing it on the maintenance, you never let it allow it to sort of build up to a level where you start where your functions are overall start deteriorating, like sleep, of course, and so on. So in general, it should be part of anybody's lifestyle, really, a gentle detox cleansing, like in our part of the world, of maybe in Canada as well, we have sauna, we
Yep.
sweat and so on and so on. So just we've had this through centuries.
That.
It was part of our culture for a long
Yeah.
time.
And the interesting part about sauna is that for, I'd say 70% of the people, that helps them go to sleep.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Me,
it helps so many levels. Yeah.
I get a whole epinephrine hit, and and I'm wired up and ready to go again. So,
Yeah. So Ken, if people wanted to reach out to you, where can they find your group?
well, probably the easiest one is just go to Biology Reboot, Logical Action Mitigation.
Thank you very much for joining me today
No
and
problem.
sharing your wisdom and knowledge. It was fun talking to you.
Excellent. Excellent.
That's all for this time, friends. If you do plan on trying this approach, please let us know in the comments how it goes for you. Both Ken and I would be very curious to find out what your results are. I will also experiment and post another update for you in the near future. And by the way, there's one presentation that we mentioned in our talk was about timing the melatonin. It is by Fabian Welsh. That was recorded during the Biohacker Summit in Helsinki. So I'll put a link to that presentation and any other pertinent info in the description below. So sleep well, and we'll see you next time. Bye.